And we are live. Greetings, beautiful beings, and salutations. And thank you for coming to this very special stream today with the ever amazing Peter Chiykowski. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I am so amped by that video ad. I've never been so excited to be like, yes, yes, give me the next beat. That's so good. Oh my gosh,
I actually made that, so thank
love
you.
it.
That is a personal compliment for me.
No, that was the hype train was building in the Twitch chat. The music was coming on. They're like, I want to go build a world now. I'm gonna ditch this conversation and go build a world.
No, don't leave us. We need you. We need you, of course, because we are talking about mood, tone, and theme in world building. Now, those of you using World Anvil already will know that these are themes very dear to my heart because this is what our world building meta is all about. When you start a world in World Anvil, it's a good idea to start with a meta, get meta with it, think about the big ideas, and mood, tone, and theme are way up there on, I think, slide 1 or 2 of the meta. They're like some of the first things that you think about when you're building a world because, yeah, that's where all the good stuff comes from. So we're going to be talking about that today. But let me introduce Peter properly first. Peter Chiykowski is a true Renaissance man, dare I say, genius. A writer, an editor, an illustrator, and creator. His poetry and short fiction have appeared in numerous magazines and collections, and his webcomic rock paper Cynic, which you should all follow over on Twitter, by the way. It is hilarious. I freaking love it. Is an online sensation that won Best Graphic Novel Awards in 2014 and 2018. He's also the creator of the wildly popular Story Engine deck and quite recently, the Deck of Worlds. These are card decks which can be randomly compiled to create story prompts or world building prompts. And I don't know if you can see, but I have them both because I'm a big old fan. Peter, just before we get in, can you tell me a little bit about the concept behind the Story Engine deck and the Deck of Worlds?
Yeah, for sure. I think what makes them sort of stand out is that they're not. It's not a deck of prompts. It's a deck that you make prompts out of. They're almost like little uh, story. You build your own story molecules out of these atoms, and the atoms are things like you have a deck of basic character types and archetypes. You have a deck of motivations, a deck of like objects and locations, a deck of conflicts, and a deck of aspects or like just descriptions that would help personalize more of those other elements. And you can combine them in all sorts of different ways to create story maps, story structures, instant story prompts, and there's just kind of like a weird little alchemy to it where it bypasses the part of your brain that like worries, is this story idea good enough? And by the time you've laid these cards out and chosen your prompts, you've actually already kind of started telling the story to yourself. So it's a good way to bypass writer's block. It's a lot of fun. And the other thing that I like about it, the demo is freely available. You can download it and try it out for yourself, so you can find out if it's like a thing that you'd like. Storyenginedeck.com/demo has the demo, and we have the same thing for Deck of Worlds, deckofworlds.com/demo. And Deck of Worlds was an interesting one. It's like half map making, half world building in kind of an entwined process where you lay out different locations. You give them little landmarks to tag on, and then you start to add on bits of lore. So there's a deck of origin cards for like the background of the place, a deck of attribute cards for like what are things like right now, what's the current status quo, and then a deck of what I call advent cards, which are these coming changes that could affect your world or be like really good story hooks for bringing characters and players or like the characters of your novel, depending on what kind of world building you're doing. Yeah, and they're just a pair of tools that when you combine them together, you can kind of fill in a world from top to bottom, from like the street level stories going on to the top level conflicts. I just think that's pretty exciting, pretty fun pair of tools, and you can download the little demo for free if you want to give it a try.
Delena is already saying this is on her dream list. I know that
Oh,
ECC Books is absolutely adoring it. ECC Books is a writing professor and has been recommending this to all of his students. He
thank
says
you
it's
so much.
just such a wonderful tool, and he's been absolutely loving it. So big love
Thank
for
you.
your work here.
Thanks so
But
much.
also, guys, that's why I asked Peter, because he's so knowledgeable about both world building and storytelling, and I thought that would be so valuable for this topic particularly.
Yeah, for sure. This
So
is like
shall
definitely one of
we?
those overlap things between those two, where like fully like it's a storytelling toolbox thing, it's a world building toolbox thing. And I think it's the world building toolbox thing that often gets forgotten. And that's why I love that you have this moment where you have people stop and contemplate it when they're building their world, because it's like so much can flow from making decisions about that, or just being aware that you are even unconsciously making decisions about it as you build your world.
Absolutely. So let's kick off. Mood and tone, aesthetic and genre, they all play, as we've mentioned, this huge role in the DNA of our settings. And it's really important to understand the way that they work and what they are so that we can improve our settings. So let's kick off with mood and tone. A lot of people confuse mood and tone. What's the difference for world building?
Yeah, they're definitely they are confusing, and they're also very related. I tend to think of um, mood in some ways as an affective tone. So mood is kind of like the emotional or aesthetic atmosphere of the piece. But if you're really trying to parse it out from tone, think of it of mood as the thing that the reader is experiencing, or maybe in some cases the character is experiencing, what they feel like when the world when they're in the world. And yeah, that can have an emotional dimension to it, and it can have an aesthetic dimension to it. But it's something where it kind of yeah, it's a feeling. You wouldn't like point to it and be like, that's an example of mood. You could point to a thing and that's an example of something that creates mood. And tone is one of those things that creates mood. Not the same thing though. Tone is a bit more of like the attitude or the voice of the storyteller, and what they're communicating through that. So like tone is the choices that you as a storyteller are making about like, is the world harsh to its characters? Are people mean? Are they is the narrative tone like bleak? You can get that through like a description where you have these short sentences describing like a barren landscape. You can do tone that way. The mood is like what the effect of that is. How are the characters feeling about it? How are the players feeling about it? And you can have like a really harsh tone to a story where the mood is actually more upbeat, where like it's a really grim world, but you have these like scrappy orphans and like they're full of hope. So you can have this combination of like a dark tone and a light mood, but often they're in sync. And when they're not in sync, you just want to be kind of like careful about why, because it's a choice and it can be harder to like achieve. And yeah, so think about like tone is kind of the palette that you're working with, and then mood is kind of the effect that that palette has, when it comes to like what emotions you're putting in. And like tone, I guess you can break it down to like a bunch, like there's different techniques for establishing tone. Maybe we won't get into those like quite yet. We can save that a little bit for later. But like you can establish tone through like, if you have visuals, the visual art style that you're doing it in can communicate if it's like this is a harsh and gritty world, or one that's more like bright and happy, through like word choice, through diction. There's like a lot of ways you can kind of try that out. Yeah, so I know for me, I forget tone more often and go straight to mood, and then for me the tone choices follow implicitly from the mood that I'm going for. But it really does help to like slow those down and look at how those choices support each other. Because I think that like well, no, I'm about to jump into like why I care about these things, and maybe we want to stop there and do a little bit. Do we want to talk more about the definitions, or throw theme in the mix? How
Yeah,
are we?
I'd love to throw in some examples actually. So for me, the perfect example of mood versus tone can be encapsulated with Batman and Ankh-Morpork. So
Yeah,
in Batman, you have a gritty world. The mood is dark, it's gothic, it's dark, the world is miserable, it's a dark place. And that's really what we're trying to capture with the atmosphere. But we also see it through Batman's eyes most of the time. Batman's tone of voice, Batman's general attitude, also very, very dark. Compare that with the world of Terry Pratchett in Ankh-Morpork. So Ankh-Morpork is a dark space. It's used to tell noir stories, footpad stories, Sam Vimes stories. It's a place where there's a lot of crappy stuff. There's literally a guild of assassins and a guild of thieves. It's not a happy place to live. But the narrative voice is really upbeat. It's really punny. It's really chatty and jokey. So what you see there is you see how narrative tone can be used with mood and atmosphere to either double down on something when they go together, vis-a-vis Batman, or create a really interesting contrast vis-a-vis Terry Pratchett and Ankh-Morpork.
love it. That's such a good example. That's such a good
Yeah,
example.
I,
Yeah,
I had to think quite hard on this one because so often mood and tone are Batman, right? They're
yeah,
aligned, and then it's very hard to pick them apart. And
yeah,
it takes something like a Terry Pratchett who approaches noir fiction in this completely different way with this completely different narrative tone to be able to kind of pull them apart a bit. And it's so effective. It's so
yeah.
compelling because when the narrator does get more serious, when the tone is shifting just a little bit, it has such a big impact. But in general, it's very light and jokey, and you're hearing puns about these assassins and puns about these thieves who are beating people up in alleyways and like dark world, light tone. It's a very interesting mix.
Yeah, yeah, and I think people who play with genre a lot, I think, get very good at this because, there's a spectrum of like tones and moods within fantasy, within horror, within science fiction, but like horror in particular is a very mood and tone driven genre more than the other two, I'd say. So the moment, say, like you start to mix horror, you start doing like horror fantasy, like some elements of Game of Thrones, or like a kind of like darker Victorian steampunky fantasy, you start having to reconcile the expectations of those genres in terms of the tones and the moods that people are used to, and also in terms of the genre conventions, which are signposts and signals for what you're doing with tone and mood. So, like a dragon, generally in fantasy, is kind of a signpost for like wonder, maybe for ferocity, maybe for wonder. But there's this sense of awe or like scope that comes with it, that it comes in with whether or not you want it to. The dragon's going to come with those preconceptions. That's an attachment to genre and expectation. And same thing with like horror. You see someone like alone in a street at night in horror. That's not a cue for like this person's going to get attacked. Something bad's going to happen. In horror, we have that sense of expectation. So all of those, like it changes the meaning of which pigment you're drawing on or using, if depending on which genre lens the person's expecting you to be working through. And so I feel like people who start to mix genres and play with genre mixing start to play with expectation, and expectation is a huge function in understanding mood and tone and understanding the establishers of those things. Yeah, that's why I encourage everyone to like whatever world you create in, explore mixing other genres and explore mixing other little genre bits, because you'll get to do these fun experiments and you'll get to see like where is one sort of tone rubbing up against another and how do you make those work together, and how can you make some of those more like unintuitive choices and make them effective. It's fun. It's fun. It's fun to mix palettes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a massive fan of the story blend. What can I say?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about mood. We've talked about tone. What about themes? What are themes in world building per se?
In world building, I find that they're a little bit different than in storytelling, or they might have broader categories. Because storytelling, often you're boiling down to like one character or a group of characters, and the themes that might connect to those stories could be smaller things that they feel big, but they're small on like an interpersonal level. So like sacrifice is a theme that I think really fits, say, in storytelling about an individual character or a group of characters, but that's harder to translate to a world because it is such a personal thing. A world where like sacrifice is the theme, that might emerge more from the story you choose to tell in that world. You can have the world needs to be able to needs to be a container that can hold the themes that the themes that the characters are going to experience. So in world building in particular, I'd say themes are, for me at least, they almost end up being questions that I'm asking. Like what if we looked at a world where power corrupts fully and completely? Or what if we looked at a world where like certain types of bonds, like let's say let's say family bonds are just shaped differently. Like what would a world look like if the sense of the word family was bigger? And so that the theme that could be a small theme like family, which could be like a small storytelling theme, suddenly becomes a big theme because you're asking questions or poking at what other potential meanings of this word could be. So that's like a personal thing that I find in the way that I do world building, is that the themes will often be questions, or they'll be, rather than being like there'll be issues almost. Like I think a theme can also be an issue, right? So like the theme could be like colonization and the effect that it has. That's a theme to explore, which you could also do on a small storytelling level, but that I think fit these big world things. Yeah, so I'd say like issues fit more to the category of things that are uniquely world building themes, but you can blow up those small character themes and motivations and stuff and explore those in a big way. And sometimes it can be like a message or a meaning, like you're trying to say something about the world, or like that this kind of a world is a bad one or this kind of world is a good one. Message, the goal of what you're trying to do with the world can fit in there for sure. But I think just as often it can be more of an open-ended thing, like a question, like a what happens if, or what if, or I want to explore this sort of thing. How do you go about describing or explaining it?
Yeah, so for me, the literary themes are often about what happens to people, and they're often very tied up in plot. So a rags to riches theme is really a rags to riches plot, even though in a world where you're telling a rags to riches story, you might create there's a statue of this ancient guy who started out as a swineherd and became a hero, and it's a foreshadowing moment, and it's a sort of restatement of the theme in a physical object for your story. But I think if you're creating worlds with many stories, you need to be a little bit more careful about your themes. You need to be careful about themes that are too specific. And I think Lord of the Rings, I think Middle-earth handles this very well. So in Middle-earth, one of the themes that you see is the leaving of magic from the world and the general sense of decay. There is this general sense that both wonder and majesty is leaving the world. And now that's expressed in loads of different ways. The elves are leaving, right? The trees have fallen asleep. The all of the big, majestic places in the world, the most magnificent places, they're abandoned, they're crumbling, they're falling apart. And often this is a result of hubris as well, which ties into a secondary theme of the world, which is power is dangerous and hubris is dangerous because people are dangerous because power is dangerous, right? Like there's a little cycle there that you see reiterated in all sorts of spaces within the world, within the stories, all of the stories, in the Silmarillion, in the Lord of the Rings, in the Hobbit. So for me, there's like that's a little world building theme in there that it's never really stated in the stories, but you see it in so many bits of the world, the sense of decay, the sense of forgotten or abandoned majesty. For me, that's a world building theme. It's not something that is too linked up into a single story. It's something that is represented in many areas. So that might be in another world, that could be, instead of, abandoned majesty, that could be forgotten majesty. And the fact that there are all of these incredible places that have just been forgotten, that's actually one of the themes of the Dark Crystal, which I was lucky enough to get to write in. So I had to create a metaphor because I had to write in it. And that was one of the themes of that, was really like, there's all this majestic stuff, but it's just been forgotten about. Like the world is seeded with wonder that nobody knows is there. For me, that's a world building theme. It's something that will recur in many different ways, in many different spaces, in forgotten objects, in forgotten landmarks, like in all sorts of different ways that theme can be expressed in the world, but it's not necessarily something that's tied to one particular story. And that's the problem with big worlds, right? Often when we think of big worlds, we're like, the single story that is told in this world. But the most successful worlds are worlds where there are thousands of stories. And, any NPC that you pick up, you can be like, and this guy has a really interesting story, and that guy has a really interesting story. And there are previous ages and past ages. I'm going on a bit of a rant here, but for me, that's world building theme is about thematic reoccurring elements in the world. And what you may have noticed, if you're very astute, which I'm sure you are, and many of our audience are, is that these are playing right into mood and tone. A world that is full of forgotten wonders is a world that is wondrous. Mm-hmm. A wondrous world waiting to be explored. A world that is full of abandoned and crumbling magnificent places is a world that's grim, like the world of Middle Earth. These are world-building themes, and they are so, as Peter said before, inextricably linked, which is why it's very hard to talk about one without talking about the other. So that's my take.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit that I love that I think Charles Schultz said it about designing characters, casts of characters. But with Peanuts, he thought of each character as a key on a piano, so that in order to be able to play a piece, you want a variety of characters that can each hit different notes, so that you can compose these sort of larger tunes. And I'd say that in some ways, the same thing I think is true of like world building. If you're trying to build a world you can tell a variety of stories in, then you definitely want. So you want to have like a core theme, like what tone is this piece in, but you also want to have a variety of keys, right? Like you want to have the hobbits, who are this more like low, like almost like a rather than high fantasy, they're almost low fantasy, right? Like they're these very simple people who love salt of the earth things. That's going to let you play a bunch of things with theme, with tone, with mood that you wouldn't do if you hadn't thought about how do I make sure that I get those notes in. You also have like the high elves, which have like a very different vibe. But each of those has a different place in the world. They can be linked through story. And again, it gives you that wide range to be able to tell a story like The Hobbit in the same world as you tell the story of the Silmarillion and you tell the story of Lord of the Rings, where each of those stories, I would say, have related but different themes, different tones, different moods. But Tolkien, as a great world builder, figured out like, how do I make sure that the piano has this range so that I can hit all of that, and that gives me the freedom to retell stories in this world and have each one feel different.
A world that I think does that very well is, funnily enough, a world that I don't quote very often, because some of the things I don't think are great and some of the things I think are amazing. The world of Star Wars Multiverse, is a world where there are literally infinite stories to tell. And honestly, Disney is freaking trying right now. But yeah, it's a world where there are so many stories, and the themes are quite clear in these stories, but the stories themselves are wildly different. The characters are wildly different. There are high magic stories, there are low magic stories, like Andor, literally not a Jedi to be seen in Andor, which I just finished, by the way, no spoilers, but no Jedis. But then you get things like the Clone Wars, which I'm now watching, which is absolutely Jedi packed. Like it's a Jedi a minute and all sorts of magic juju and weird stuff going on. And it's a space where you can tell all of these stories. And as you said, there are the highs like Coruscant, there are the lows like Tatooine. There are these sort of reoccurring themes that you see, like injustice, which is really, again, injustice is something that is fundamentally built into the setting. Some people have magic, some people don't. Some people have stuff, some people don't. Corruption is another one. And corruption is actually a great world building theme, because corruption is something that can be physical, it can be political, it can be personal, it can be so many different things that work in so many different ways that really create a theme and a mood and a tone to your story and give you so much. And it's actually very easy to build in.
Yeah. I think Star Wars is a great example of, again, a universe where, like, you can just create a new world to convey a certain kind of like tone or theme, or to become like almost a terrarium for a different style of storytelling. But all of it feels like Star Wars, and I think that I would say that understanding your tone and theme and mood is going to be almost more important for creating a consistent experience for whoever's entering your world in whatever format, whether RPG campaign or novel or movie. I think that's more important for them understanding the consistency of the world, as like that force is more important than gravity, I would say, for holding your world together and for having the player or the reader have a consistent experience in it. Because if you break your own rules about like how trade would work or how fast ocean travel would get character from point A to point B, that's the kind of thing that an audience can forgive if they even notice it. But they won't forgive, or they will definitely notice at the very least, if suddenly if it is a theme of your tone that if it's a theme of your world that all actions bear consequences, and like consequence is a theme, and a character does something and really, really risky and is not like punished for it or doesn't experience a negative consequence, that's going to feel wrong. And I think your audience or your players will notice that. They'll notice that it feels different. And I would say, like, I think that's the issue that a lot of people had with like late season Game of Thrones, was that a lot of the theme changed a little bit, but definitely I'd say the mood and the tone did. And all of a sudden, the rules of the world that felt like action and consequence felt different. And that was a shift, and like people really noticed that, and they noticed that more than how consistent your economic system is, or how hierarchized your power structures are. And that's why I think like it's so good to have that at the top. If you're giving people this prompt or this shape to be able to think about how they're going to build their world, that's such a good thing to define from the top, because it gives you that you can always go back to it and be like, is this consistent with the goals that I set out? Is this consistent with what I want this world to do and feel like? And also, like, if you find that your tone is too narrow, or your mood is too narrow, and it's limiting you, and you're not able to like find moments of comedy or brightness that you want, then it lets you sort of re-explore it. And how do I find room for alternate tones or alternate moods within whatever scape I'm trying to build? Like, how do I ease up a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about mood and tone and theme separately. Let's dig in a little bit more now that we all know the definitions of what we're talking about. Number one, should world building always have a theme?
I think that it's going to, kind of whether or not you want to. Like, unconsciously, there's things that you as a creator are. I think we all want to think about world building as this like moment where we get to be a god, but we are very flawed gods, right? Like, we have our own priorities, our own anxieties, and all of that shows up in our creative work, no matter what. So I think that you're going to have a theme whether or not you want to. And so giving yourself the opportunity to just be honest about that and engage with it and think about like what are the boundaries of that would be helpful. And I think that's going to help anyone. So like, I think you can, through a combination of being just like maybe naturally gifted in understanding theme, or being a very good storyteller, or just getting lucky, you might never need to think about theme and produce something that's great. And that's awesome. Like, this may not be a tool that you reach for in your toolbox that often, because you have other ways of achieving the same effects. But I think it's a really important tool. I think it's worth just at least knowing how it works. So that's my take on it, is like, you don't have to have a theme, but you kind of do already. You don't have to engage with it, I guess, is what I'd say. But there's a lot of benefits to it. What about you? How would you answer that question?
it doesn't have to have a theme, but one of the dangers of world building without thinking about theme and mood and tone is you get everything in the kitchen sink worlds.
Yeah.
Now that's not necessarily bad. I would describe the world of Dungeons and Dragons, the core setting of the Sword Coast, as an everything in the kitchen sink world. That's okay. Galarian from Pathfinder, definitely an everything in the kitchen sink world. You've got barbarians next to robots. I don't even know. It's crazy. I love it. I'm playing Pathfinder right now. There's a lot of fun to be had in settings like that. But it also means that it never quite feels like, that good distilled touchstone of a setting. It never has that moment where you're like, this is The Witcher. I know what this feels like. This is The Witcher. It feels like the wind is blowing and it's cold and that I can hear something behind me. That's The Witcher. It's grim, it's dark, it's uncomfortable, but I know exactly what it is. So I like those kinds of like touchstones. For me, that starts with theme. It starts with what do I want that repeating motif to be?
Yeah. And I think you can I think it becomes like I think you can do kitchen sink worlds and then use theme as an editorial lens to like maybe go back through and be like, what's my best material here for supporting this theme? What parts can I either cut or like maybe reconfigure a little bit so that they're not pulling in the opposite direction of the theme? Because I think you're right. Like it's really hard to that feeling of like you can show someone a still shot and they know it's from the Star Wars universe or they know it's from Witcher universe is not really as true of D&D. When you think about like what makes say the D&D movie like the trailer of it feel like that does feel like Dungeons and Dragons is that it calls on tropes of how we play Dungeons and Dragons, not of the world. Like I don't think that there's anything iconic in how they show like a certain shot of the world and like that what's what D&D feels like because it is kind of a kitchen sink world and there's a bunch of different aesthetics and that's a good thing when you're trying to make a big sandbox for a ton of different people to be able to create their own themes and their own stories. Like that makes sense for a really open-ended product like an RPG that needs to be able to fit all kinds in it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, for the movie, I think what makes the movie like when I watched the trailer, what made it feel like D&D was like that feeling of like a party that's not quite working together and you want them to. Like it was more like table tropes than it was world tropes when it came to D&D. Yeah. That's what felt like D&D to me in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like table tropes plus one dragon.
Yeah, plus a dragon. Yeah,
absolutely. No, I agree with that assessment 100%. And I think that that's the benefit of theme. Theme is something that it gives you that sort of immediate touchstone, that relevance, that, oh yes, this is Batman. There's somebody hunched on a gothic gable and it's raining. This is Batman. Or somebody is really dark but Batman is going to have to work with them and make a grim, greasy, grey, morally dubious choice. That's Batman. I feel like I just need a gift that says it's Batman. Yeah. But Batman's great for this because it's got really, really strong visual moments. Like there's a reason that all of those gothic things are slightly crumbling, right? That's because the idea is that the society is slightly crumbling. It's a metaphor, guys. It's a metaphor, and it's a really useful one. So yeah, that's why I love themes. We've talked a little bit about what kind of themes work well already, so I won't answer that question. But can a world setting have a different theme to the stories being told in that setting?
I think it would be a challenging one to pull off, and I'm curious to know if you have anything in mind as like examples that do it, because I think what you can do is I think that what tends to happen is you kind of unveil a new part of the world when you start to try to tell a story that feels like it's out of theme with the rest of it. Like I think an interesting example of this is kind of the like the Elder Scrolls video game series, where like each game does feel defined differently from the rest. Like Skyrim feels like Skyrim, Oblivion feels like Oblivion, and I think part of what they do is sort of zoom in on different parts of the world to make sure that theme can feel different, and there'll be related bits of it. Like heroism is always a big theme, and like some kind of large cosmic struggle is always a big theme. And they have a lot of recurring like images and world building elements that come back again and again and again. But I think that one of the ways that they manage to have those games feel more defined than say like the world of D&D is because they give themselves a bit more room to like lean in geographically. So I think you can do it, but I think that the most effective way to do it tends to be like, hey, I'm going to create like the alternate world timeline of this, or I'm going to create a new island or a new continent, or re-explore this continent in greater detail, when it was kind of the last time we looked at it, it was a very low resolution look. So saving like gray spaces, those gray spaces that you haven't defined yet in your world that let you like suddenly explore them in more detail, is like a good way to hold room for different themes. But I think you can create situations where you get like clash, and I do think that the best way to, like, if you want to be able to tell a ton of different story types, doing that, the Disney thing in Star Wars, even in Marvel, like even in Marvel does, I think, a good job of like knowing which characters are going to be their and which storylines are their comedy ones, and leaving room for that in their multiverse. I think that maybe taking that more zoomed out, not necessarily everything in the kitchen sink, but like how do I create a world that's going to have this breadth of theme, tone, and mood, is a good way to approach it if you want to be able to do that. It's my take on it, but I'm really curious for yours.
It's tough, right? Because again, you mentioned Marvel, which is a great example, and I'm just going to have to do a little bit of double check in here because I get confused between DC and Marvel Daredevil. Just triple checking that was in fact correct. So Marvel's Daredevil is dark and grim and gritty, and then you get other things from Marvel that are like so high magic that you can't even.
Yeah.
And on the surface of it, it does work because they create little microcosms in the setting. They create these like little micro spaces where it sometimes it feels like Daredevil has a shot collar, and if he goes out of Hell's Kitchen, it just goes off.
Yeah.
A little bit. Like he could literally go next door and get the help of the superhero in the other district of New York, but he doesn't. He tries to fix all the problems himself. Why? Yeah. Who knows? They couldn't afford the other actor, maybe. And I think that's the danger here, is if you're trying to tell too many stories in a setting and they're too different.
Yeah.
It can start to jar. And I think that is something that I like less about the Marvel world, is that it never feels like, I don't know what the Marvel world feels like. Is it Doctor Strange? Is it Daredevil? Is it, laugh a minute Guardians of the Galaxy, who are just basically a D&D group in space?
Yeah.
I love them. I enjoy the movies, but what does the Marvel world look like? I have no idea, because there's no themes there. There's not even a theme like, oh, with great power comes great responsibility, because that is definitely not the case in like half of the Marvel movies, right? The Star-Lord has great power. He doesn't seem to have great responsibility. He just seems to like joke around a lot. So at that point, like, I really enjoy it, but it doesn't feel like strong world building to me. It just feels like a connection of loosely connected franchise movies.
I would agree with that. The bit where I'll give them the most credit is, I think that the sort of Infinity War saga, they had to figure out like, how do we take all, and so you'll notice that like Infinity War definitely feels different than like Guardians of the Galaxy. But they did manage to, I think, find a way to tell a story where at least like a really irresponsible character like Peter Quill Star-Lord could participate in a moment where responsibility did matter, where like what is the cost of heroism did matter. And it might even be because maybe there's like a little bit of like, they warm up some of those themes, maybe a little bit in like the Guardians. Guardians is usually like 80% the party's screwing around, and then 20%, okay, the big bad's here, we have to figure something out. Let's take this seriously for like one session. Like that's sort of the model for those movies. And
Absolutely.
I think that basically the only way they could make Infinity War work was to take that 20% moment of like, how we're going to end up having something as like beautiful as like the Reaver funeral at the end of I think it's Guardians 2. Like, let's lean in more to that kind of thing as we look at like, what does grief look like in a world where like half the people are gone. And I think they managed to like, but they had to do a lot of like, take the 20% of this that works with the 20% of this, and like figure out that like all these Venn diagram circles that they created of these different types of storytelling bits, like where are the bit where they all overlap. And it does mean like doing a lot of stretching and pulling in to make it work. But I do think I think they stuck the landing, not necessarily all the flips and flourishes they were doing before the landing, but that bit of landing, at least for me, I think it was like, okay, I see it. But it like, geez, I wonder how many revisions they had to go through to even get to the point where it felt like this movie contains all these characters, and these characters are the same ones we saw in their other stories. That's a lot.
I agree with you. I think story-wise and character-wise, they pulled it together very well. I think world-wise, still has holes in for me, and that's okay.
Yeah,
I can still
yeah,
enjoy it. I can have an opinion about a thing that is not 100% positive and still go to a movie and be like, yay, Guardians of the
yeah.
Galaxy.
It would be really hard to take like one shot from Marvel to say this is what Marvel is as a world, right? Like you'd have a
Yeah.
shot that like okay that's Guardians, you'd have a shot like that's Spider-Man, but you wouldn't yeah, it'd be really hard to find one shot that encapsulates all of it other than like giant epic battle, which is again not true to all of the individual small stories going on. So yeah, I can see what you mean. I can see what you mean.
Yeah. All right, here's a spicy question, which I found online. People were asking about world building themes, and I thought, well, I have to ask this: should a world building theme be new to be effective?
Oh no, don't do that to yourself. No one should ever do that to themselves. Um, I think that the novelty, the like innovation, I think often comes in how, not what, right? So how are we going to explore this theme? What are the edges of it that maybe haven't been explored, or what are the characters that we don't normally associate with this theme? So like if everyone's done a story about sacrifice at some point, but like what kind of characters have we not seen as often in stories about sacrifice or like giving something up, and how could I maybe try a new take on it? So I think my suggestion is like themes are like the stories that we've been telling since we had language. You're probably not going to crack into something entirely new there, but look for those new combinations of mood, tone, theme. Like a really funny story about sacrifice, I can't think of one off the top of my head. So that's like how do you combine a tone or a mood that doesn't normally pair with something and make it feel consistent and good? Yeah, and then how do you execute that theme? What story archetypes do you pair it with? What character archetypes do you pair it with? I think is the place to go for the novelty. I don't normally have like hard answers to questions. I'm normally like wishy-washy. But this one, I feel like it would be just, it's so hard to find a new theme.
Yeah, and honestly, I would say it should absolutely not be new because the old themes are the ones that people connect with. An old
Yeah.
theme told in an original way, and because it's you and you are writing it, it will be
Yeah.
original because you are an original. There's no one like you.
Oh, I love that.
That's so much better than trying to be quirky and trying to tell something new that you're not certain people will connect with. The reason we connect with, these big like personal milestone moments, the reason that they're so often the focus of fiction is because we all have personal experiences related to them. We've had a
Yeah.
birthday, we've been to a christening or a marriage, we've been to a funeral. These are things that resonate with us personally, and ditto everything to do with themes of decay, themes of corruption. We've all seen a corrupt politician. I'm from the UK. We've seen a lot of them recently, and gone, oh, this is unbearable, and I feel like there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
Everybody's been in that situation. So these are the themes that really resonate with people. And the whole idea of building them into your world is because, well, I mean, at the end of the day, art is about making people feel things, right? And we want to make people feel things about our world and feel emotionally involved in our world. So let's start with something that people actually connect to. And that's those same old themes: love, death, marriage, corruption, betrayal, the ending of things, the hidden wonder of things. These are things that everybody has discussed. Anybody who's opened a present before that's been wrapped knows about hidden wonder, right?
Yeah.
Like you're keying into that 3-year-old opening a Christmas Day present for the first time.
And when you think about the emotions, the feelings that are connected to those themes, that is going to be the thing that your audience is going to experience the theme often through their memories of their feelings, and like that classic quote about like I don't remember what someone said, but I remember how they made me feel, or like not remembering the deep, like there's a reason for that. Like the part of your brain that literally getting like that produces emotions is the oldest part of your brain. It's like the oldest part of the operating system. If you want to paint with like a palette that like everyone experiences and that like really powerfully shapes personalities and feelings and thoughts and worldviews, like emotions are that's what we as like humans, it's so core to our experience of it. We can't experience the world without our emotions. Like that is the lens through which we do everything, and it's such a powerful way to get to speak to people. So like taking theme, looking at like what are the emotions that I want people to feel or that I expect that they're going to feel in connection to this, and understanding like that is a chance to like to speak to this like deep universal experience that we as humans have that binds us together. Like that's amazing. That's like the most amazing thing to get to do that. That's why again, like I think that mood is really, I think, where the viewer is going to experience the effect of your theme and the effect of your tone. So like when you get into a theme, think about it, think about what kind of mood you want to spin off that, how you want your audience to feel, and think about like what does it feel like to be to feel hopeless. Like if you're trying to go with a theme of like decay and to like a tone that is bleak, how does it feel to be like hopeless and to think like maybe there's not something better out there? Like what a devastating thing to feel. I've had moments where like yeah, it becomes hard to imagine like what's the next good step. That's a really powerful moment to be able to play with a character where like they're knocked down, and suddenly that scene where like the character faces a setback, which we've seen a million times in like the flow of 3 act structures, suddenly that moment becomes like a real um uh something where you lean into the to like surrender to that feeling, that mood of hopelessness, of bleakness, and make that something that people feel real and tangibly. And that comes because again, you thought about your theme, you thought about how it's connected to your mood, you thought about how you communicate it through tone, and all of a sudden, a scene we've all seen before takes on this new depth where like you take the time to really be present in it, to be present with the mood and the feeling, present with the theme and how it produces that, yeah, and that's where I think you get the like that's where I think focus on doing something new. Is yeah making that resonate and how you're going to make that resonate. I
So
think
we've talked. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
one more thing. The fact that emotions exist, I think like we don't think about that enough. Like what an interesting like before we had this rational forebrain to make decisions. Everything that we did was impulse and emotion, and that's still this like common language that we have. And I just think like we don't spend enough time thinking about how much feelings like absolutely change our experience of the world. And yeah, that's why like I'm so happy that there's this thing that lets us think about that in the world building workflow. Like we take for granted that like we have this amazing universal system that synchronizes us as humans and gives us these common things, and it's so powerful and it's so deep and it's so beautiful to get to experience other people through it. So lean into that with world building.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. So we've talked a little bit already about working in themes, implementing themes. We shared some examples of that. How about creating mood and atmosphere in world building? What are some ways that you can do that?
I like having sort of like tools and methods to try things out. So like on a very literal level, honestly, doing a mood board, not a bad idea. Like, and you can do a mood board through searching imagery. Like, let's imagine you're trying to do a like right now I'm doing some world building in a D&D setting for actually fun highlight. My wife was never a D&D person, and I never ever thought she would play D&D. And we've been together for like 13 years. And last year was the year she's like, I would like to play D&D with you. My conditions are I get to play a druid. I get to have an animal. The animal can't die. Other than that, open season. And I was like, done. Let's do it. So I built my first setting in a very long time, and it's a sort of maritime setting. So like some of the themes that I was looking at are cultural difference, like having more islands and these more different cultures and how they interact. Themes of like exploration and colonization. But what I wanted to do when I looked at like sort of more mood and tone is have that sense of like excitement, of adventure, of like freedom of the open sea, to have those feelings be something that all the players were feeling as they were experiencing the world. I did a lot of like googling like ships and like paintings of ships. Do I want like Age of Exploration vibes where it feels like an oil painting? Do I want something more like zany, like Pirates of the Caribbean feeling? So mood board is great, and like I would say, don't feel self-conscious about the fact that you're using borrowed material to start. Part of what you're doing is you're assembling a palette. Like I like this and I like this and I like this. I want to be able to use this. Don't crib things wholesale, but like let yourself draw on inspiration. So like and a mood board, like I'd argue that a playlist is just a mood board for your ears. It's just like the auditory version of that. So like find playlists of like pirate themed music and maritime music and sea shanties, and other things. So like playlists, I'm big on. Mood boards, I'm big on. Word clouds, I find are very helpful often. Like just writing out a bunch of words that feel related and then being able to parcel those out into like, that's a theme word, that's a tone word, that's a mood word. Really helpful. So like word clouds I think are great. And then sometimes just spending time with like your comps, with your comparables. Like it's again, I think that we have this very, very big pressure as world builders to like do something wholly new, and we often try and like file the serial numbers off when we do use elements that inspired us. And obviously like you want to make it your own, but like I say, like don't be afraid of that influence, and don't be like afraid to spend some time like watching a bunch of pirate movies or reading some pirate books, so that you can connect with the world building elements, the images, the character types, the archetypes that help you feel the feelings that you want your readers to feel, or you want your players to feel when they enter your world. So like getting to like read like a Treasure Island kind of book, and like pay attention to like, when do you get really excited about like exploration and discovery? What were the cues for that moment? Was it because a character was getting on board a ship, well, then a ship's going to be a really important device for giving people a feeling of discovery and exploration. So I know that I need a ship in my world and in my story. So like just paying attention to when you're feeling the feelings that you want people to feel, and working backwards from that to get that theme. What tone do I use to get that tone? What theme? Sorry, to get that mood. What tone do I use to get that tone? What themes need to allow for those things to follow, and like working backwards from there. But yeah,
Yeah,
also
I
paying
love that.
attention to your own feelings is like a good thing to do on a just like being a healthy person level, and such a good thing to do as a writer or world builder of any kind.
Yeah, 100%. In World Anvil's meta, we literally have a section that is called the inspiration section, and it's like, what are your movie inspirations for this? What are your book inspirations? What are your playlist inspirations? What are your image inspirations? Because these touchstones don't just help you create the beginning, they are touchstones you can revisit whenever you're feeling like you don't know what you want to write, you don't know where to go next, your players have done a thing and you don't know where to take them, or you've been promising this dungeon and you have no idea what it's going to look like. Go back to your themes and that will give you something. Go back to your inspirations and that will give you something.
For sure.
It's the same for writers. You're like, yes, and then through the door, ... Oh God, what? And then you go back to your inspirations and you go back to your motivation and theme and all of that stuff. And you go, oh yes, of course it has to be a mausoleum, because that's tied into my themes of forgotten splendor or the circle of life, or whatever theme it is that you're trying to dig into. You can find something that's going to work for that, and you can reinterpret it in a new way every time. So we've talked a little bit about mood and atmosphere, and as you said, inspiration is something that's really, really key. I would also say that baking mood into different levels of your setting is a really good idea. So if you want your space to be very, very, like, let's take The Witcher, grimdark. We're going grimdark. It's a nice, easy one to start building. Well, I'm going to make choices about my fundamental setting. I'm going to say natural law, lots of thunderstorms here. Maybe even magical thunderstorms. If it's a setting that's, very high fantasy, okay, there's loads of magical thunderstorms here. The chance of there being a magical thunderstorm is really high. So I've got the world working for me. I've got the weather working for me. I've got all of those things going. And then I'm going to start laying on the trappings. So it's really grim and dark because it's cloudy all the time. And you've got to walk through rain all the time. And it's cold and it's uncomfortable. And what if it's muddy because it's been raining? Okay, very grim surroundings. You can do whatever you want with this, right? This is just one example. Other elements like natural laws. Maybe if... I don't know, if blood is spilled, something comes hunting you. That's nice and grimdark, isn't it? So let's add that as a piece of world setting. Like the stakes are raised. If you get injured, it's only going to get worse. Okay, so I've got two natural laws that are super helpful for me. One is the weather, and one is something is always going to be hunting you if you're bleeding. And now I start laying in the trappings. So when I go into a space, it's not going to be full and beautifully brightly lit, because that wouldn't be very grimdark. No, it's going to have guttering candles that smell like pig fat. And what you're doing is you're layering from the big elements. You're making the world work for you in the big spaces, and then you're layering on in the small spaces as well. And this is a really, really useful way to bake in mood into your scenes and settings. So you start with big world, and then you go to small world, and then you go to internal sensation. And it's just a nice way to like really bake in the mood from the outside in, so you don't feel like you're trying to make it moody, but it's not landing for some reason. Like they come in from outside and it's dark, but it feels like any other dark pub. Yeah. Like maybe it even feels cozy because you're like, it was dark, but there was a fire burning, and you're like, oh, that's quite nice. You don't want your readers to be feeling that.
Yeah, but everything's covered in soot.
Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect example. Or in the next tavern, because it's always raining, there's a bucket in the corner, and there's this very slow, sad plot.
Yeah.
Plot because the roof is broken. How grimdark is that, right? So you're constantly seeking to change up the trappings and really bake in what you want from the mood and the theme and tone, particularly the theme, like I was saying before with Tolkien, the way he does this stuff with, the fallen splendor. Everything's like, this was once a magnificent palace, but then the hubris of the dwarves like uncovered a thing, and now it's full of darkness. Like how Lord of the Rings is that? Moria is like the most Lord of the Rings place. But also sometimes, like if you use magic, things know about it. That is so sinister. That is a natural law of the Middle-earth universe. If you are using big magic, somebody knows. They can see you, and it's creepy. And that's so Middle-earth, right? And that's kind of what you want to be building into your setting, so that they feel rich and rich and rich. And what that means is, like, some days it won't be raining, and your players will be like, "Oh, at least it's not raining today." Like, that's the best thing that's happened to them all day, is that their feet are less moist.
Love it.
So I would say, yeah, keep building, keep layering, like an oil painting. You want to get big stuff in the back, you want to get fine work in the front, and you want to build and build and build. So your setting feels so richly baked with these moods and these themes that you can't turn around but find them. But also they're not like in your face, right? Because they're just built into everything. So it never feels like, oh, look, it's another ruined thing. Yeah. Because that's just how this world is. That's how the world works.
And I think you don't have to do it all at once. Like, I know that world building feeling of like, oh, I have to do all of this. You can like, it takes one detail to, like, I would say no more than 3 details to establish a scene. So make the one detail count, right? Like, that dripping bucket in the corner would be, that's all I need to imagine the rest of the tavern. Now I know that what kind of tavern it is, because that indicates disrepair. Hello, dampness, my mold friend.
Sorry. Thank you, the cartographer Elysium, for that hilarious quote. I'm sorry for distracting you, Peter.
No, that was perfect. That was perfect. But like, so much, it tells you so much about the space, right? Like, that one detail communicates that sense of decay. The fact that, like, these people either don't have the money or the interest in keeping it up because they've surrendered to the rain. Rain is like a natural law that they're just like, okay, this is how we live. So you don't have to, like, think about, you don't have to fill your world with all these details to start. It can be like, well, what's the next scene I'm going to tell? What is one detail that communicates mood? And again, the detail might be the tone, right? It might be the tone that you're using to communicate the mood and the theme. So, like, what is one detail that's going to synchronize those things or start to establish some of them? And it can be, a dripping bucket. It can be like a ray of sunshine that pops in at just the right moment, but then it's gone. Like, it can be these small things that just, and you don't need a lot of them. So, like, try to, if you even want to have like a little checklist for yourself when you're like coming up with plotting scenes, if you are going to plot a story in your world, or just like one detail per area that you plan that people might visit, where you're like, what is the one detail that'll communicate this? Having that be part of your little checklist for building each location, not a bad idea. And then it gives you those quick ingredients in the cupboard of the storyteller that you can, like, grab. Oh shoot, I need a moment to establish this. You have those ingredients ready, and you don't need to have, a full cupboard for each location, but one ingredient per location. All of a sudden you've got this rich cupboard, and you can do that slowly. You can take your time with it. It doesn't have to be like a rushed thing where you're just trying to, like, dump creative assets around your world so that it feels full. One well-defined detail will go so much better than a million pages of lore. For at least absolutely. For how the end user, the player or the reader is going to experience your world.
Yeah, 100%. Like, you don't want to bombard players with details of setting the scene. You want the allouds to be very cleverly written. So you're giving scene, and you're giving hints about what might be a trap, and you're giving lore, and you're giving all of those things all together. So you've got to be very sparing, very clever with your language. I mean, particularly allouds are a fine art. But in writing as well, you've got to try and make all of these things work together, right? Like, setting the mood and the atmosphere is just one piece of the larger puzzle of crafting great prose, like what the end user actually sees. Yeah. But it's a really important one, and it's one that a lot of people miss. And then you get the feeling that the stories are just happening in space. So it's one that you can really make use to your advantage. I think you touched on something there that is so important, and this has to be my last question, because we have audience questions, and they're really good too. How do you vary mood in your world building to stop things getting boring?
I'm going to recommend actually just straight up a book that taught me how to do this. I think it's called Beating the Story. It's by Robin Laws, and it's basically a book on beat mapping. So this is a little bit more story-based than world-based. And you can prepare your world to give you success at the storytelling side, but this was the tool that's given me the most, like, vocabulary to talk about it. And basically, like, looking at on a moment to moment and scene to scene basis, are these upbeats, neutral beats, or downbeats? If you have too many downbeats in a row, even in a grim dark setting, too many downbeats in a row, like, Gerald of Rivia is just he's constantly getting rained on, he's getting knocked around, no victories, no wins, no moment where like if the only good thing that happens this episode is like there's a moment where he catches the blade at the right moment. That is an upbeat moment. Like literally, it can be as fine sliced as that. So one thing that is really important for varying tone is just like going through your story, looking at it on like a scene to scene level or moment to moment level, and doing like, is this an uptick in like the is this like a good thing, the player's winning, or the character's winning? Is it a downbeat, or is it staying neutral? And making sure that there's a pattern and a rhythm is good. And in a grimdark rhythm, you might just have the overall trend is that things are going down, things aren't great, but there still are some moments where we get these bits of hope to break up the otherwise monotony of losses. And it's what creates tension and suspense. It's what creates stories where like we don't know what's going to happen, because sometimes good things happen, sometimes bad things happen. But overall, overall there might be like the trend of the graph might tell you something about the kind of mood of the world, or the tone of the world, and what to expect with the story.
Yeah.
So that's a great resource. But yeah, pay attention to is this an emotionally positive, neutral, or negative scene or moment or element, and making sure that your world has some places where you can imagine a positive thing happening. Like I think a great example is like when characters suffer a big loss in a story, often there's a moment where like they're even fighting about it afterwards, but often there's a moment of like reconciliation or resolution, or a moment of rest, or a moment of like someone reconnecting with something that they lost, and that's usually how like the character rallies. So in a world building perspective, what you can look at is like, where's my Rivendell? Right? Like
Yes,
where's my place
exactly.
where when they get there the characters feel safe? That's an upbeat. So no one location has to always be the positive location or the negative location, but like maybe even within the city, like where is my character's haven where they feel good? Where can I give them a scene where like over a drink they are consoled and they're happy? Or like alternatively, where's the places where my character feels safe? If I really want to create a dark node, how do I threaten that, right? How do I reverse the association of this as a positive place and take something away to create like this more negative thing? So, but just being aware of those beats, so the upbeats and downbeats in your story, and is your world full only of things that feel like they're going to create downbeats, or things that will feel like they create upbeats, is important. And like another way to do it is if you do want to tell a really dark world story, and you don't want the story to be dark all the time, but you want the world to be consistently dark, that's a great place to think about, like, say, characters, because not every character is going to be dark in the setting. So, like, who's the character who's the spot of light? Who's your Samwise Gamgee, who, in an otherwise really dark story and traveling through these dark lands, is kind of this, like, this bearer of brightness and levity. So thinking about those elements down to like a character level, if you don't want to have the world be something that has to violate its own rules as like a negative place, who's the character who brings the positivity? I think, and vice versa. Like if you have a world that's wondrous all the time, who's the like mercenary who like just is not impressed with the big, beautiful, majestic statue that you're passing by? Is like, I could carve something better. Like who's not taking it seriously? Like you want to go both ways. Someone who can be negative in the positive scenes too. So like characters can be a great resource for that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you mentioned Lord of the Rings. There's two there for me. It's Rivendell, and then it's when they meet Galadriel as well, which is this moment of like, oh, where there's this sort of magical, just oozing out the wazoo, all of a sudden, light, wonder, all the good stuff. And that.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say, and that combined with this like massive darkness, it's so poignant, right? Because it shows what has gone out of the world. It shows what is being lost. So the light there, it doesn't counteract the darkness. It makes the shadows darker. It's so cleverly done.
It's so good.
Yeah, exactly. Because when they finally meet that thing and they're like, the world used to be full of this and it's gone out of the world. What have we lost? It's spectacular. Oh my god, yeah.
And what I love about that section with Galadriel is like right when we feel a little bit too safe, that's when we have the downbeat with the visions of the future and what could come to pass. That's when we have the downbeat of even Galadriel is kind of potentially corruptible. Even in this place where we haven't felt safe in a long time, we feel safe for a moment. We see this vision of like, what if the power corrupted her? And then they have to leave, and they take with them the light, right? So it's a moment later where we had all these downbeats. We get an upbeat where we pull out the vial, and we have this element that we know is going to be an upbeat at some point. And that's what I mean by like scanning, doing an audit of like your world for like, is everything here grim? Where are the little bits where I could, Tom Bombadil in the books for sure, like this great upbeat moment after like the Barrow Wights and these very dark bits, being able to counterbalance those upbeats and downbeats, and just knowing which doing an audit of your world for elements that could be used for upbeats, that could be used for downbeats, so you can pull on those as a storyteller when you want to use them, I think is a really great thing to do, really worthwhile activity.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't say it again, but I really hate Tom Bombadil so much. just personal. I love the Lord of the Rings. I love Tolkien. Tom Bombadil needs to go sit in a hole.
I fully understand why it was cut. I have no
terrible
defense
person. I should not hate him so much, but yeah, not for me. Thank you. All right. On that note, me hating on Tolkien. I've got a bit of a reputation for hating Tolkien.
Is it the
not
constant,
hate Tolkien.
Is it the constant songs, or is it the raincoat?
It's just the terrible songs, and they're so bad. Oh man, bless him. Tolkien was such a great prose writer. He should not have taken up poetry. No, not for me. It's cool. It's cool, man. I'm cool. All right, let's do some audience questions because we have some great ones here.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on what writing or wordsmithing methods would help me convey awe and wonder? This is a Sudayan question. A very good one.
Ooh. I want to think about my answer for a sec. Do you have something that comes off the top of the dome for you?
I think awe and wonder is very much about what you're trying to paint with it. Generally, when you're talking about awe, you're talking about light and you're talking about color. But that depends on your world, right? If your world is already full of light and color, it might be shadow that is mysterious. It might be glitter in smoke that is mysterious. So all of a sudden, wonder becomes something that is not the norm. It becomes the other. And it becomes the other in a way that is not necessarily easy for us to digest or understand. So I would say for me, that's how wonder comes. It's something that is other to the rest of the world. And it's that contrast that makes it wondrous.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I'd add the other sort of tool you can play with for wonder is scale. I think wonder is almost inherently going to be bigger than you. And that's part of the otherness, right? Is that it's something that's bigger than you. It's something that's older than you. It's something that's deeper or more profound. It's yeah. I think that otherness is exactly right. Like it has to be on an other scale to you and feel like a different thing. And I'd say that on that line too, one of the things that I'm always obsessed with is the balance of giving information and withholding information as a storyteller, as a dungeon master, as whatever role. How much is enough to get them interested and how much is too much? It's not just about not boring them. It's about giving them room, because wonder is an activity, right? Like it's a thing that our brains do when there's a hole to fill. And so to leave room for people to wonder is, I think, also important. So like show them the epic statue, but don't give them the like, and here's the history of how it was carved. Like wonder who could have made something so big, or if we know who did, then how. So leave space for that. Leave space for wondering. Don't give them all the details. Is another thing. Like withholding could be a good tool for that.
Yeah, great absolutely. Question. And I will also say that action is so. I used to be an opera singer. Acting is reacting. So if something is wondrous, it's something that an NPC should go, oh, no one's seen this for 5,000 years. Yeah, it should be a thing that the characters take a beat to take it in. So however you want to convey that, if it's through an NPC, if it's through the main character in a novel, wonder is something that gives a reaction. It's something that you can't take it in all at once. You need a moment. And I think that that's something that will also help you convey wonder. Either use NPCs if you have issues, or use animals around you. You know, it seems like no birds sing in this place. You know, like at a pinch, right? Just to get something in there if you can't control the
nature reacting is a great way to do that. It's such a good idea. Love that.
Yeah, but some kind of reaction is going to give you the wonder. All right, next up. So the mood is about the world and the tone is about how I write about, or is the tone more about how the characters experience it? Asks Tillers. This is a great question.
Yeah, I think this kind of sits a little bit on the border of the Venn diagram between both, because how the characters speak is part of the tone, and they speak in reaction to their experiences. But I think it's the effect of seeing them, what they experience, the effect of hearing what they say that creates the mood. So yeah, to me, it's a bit of an overlap. How would you feel about it?
Yeah, so for me, tone is about the final product for me. So mood is about the aesthetic, and that's you know, it's Batman, whether it's a Batman comic or a Batman RPG. It's grim, it's dark, it's gritty, cool. That's your mood. Tone is it your world building article narrative style? Well, if you're a pure world builder, yeah, probably. Is it your GMing style during play? Is it the way you deliver the allows? Is it your narrating or writing style? You know, I used that Terry Pratchett example earlier from Ankh-Morpork, where, you know, Ankh-Morpork is a horrible noir gritty place, but Terry Pratchett is a pun a minute and we love him. So that's where the tone comes in that story. It's you know, Terry Pratchett's narration voice, the omniscient narration that is funny and jokey and belies the serious mood. But as a GM, that's the way you deliver stuff. You know, are you delivering things that are kind of like, and just when you thought everything was fine, in comes a gorgon. Shut your eyes, guys. It's about to get stony. You know, like that's tone. That's a GM tone, right? So yeah, I would say that's where it comes in. Tone is the delivery to the audience, and then it depends so much on the medium. I mean, you're a comic artist. Tone is the art as well, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And that's why, like, if you look and like reading good writers' comic scripts and studying how the artist executed that and how the artist brought their own element as a collaborator to that is a really good exercise in understanding tone and understanding mood. Because yeah, like really good comic writers will give something for the artist to work with in terms of like how it should feel in this panel. How it should feel to read it. And you'll see that come up. And like, actually, honestly, art directors, I'm very bad at art direction. I've been trying to learn the skills of it, and I'm not very good at it. I've gotten okay at it, but I'm very bad at articulating it. Because yeah, like good art direction is not just like what's in the scene or what the details are or like what kind of armor the character is wearing. It's like how should someone feel when they look at the piece? Should it feel heroic or should it feel anti-heroic? Should it feel villainous? And the details are something that the artist might be better equipped to communicate than you if you're not an artist, at like how to establish that feeling. What does villainy look like? You can suggest some details, but the artist might have like a really good toolbox to pull from to like really communicate villainy. Yeah, I completely forgot what the actual question was. Hold on.
About how the medium of art can be a tool in tone.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, yeah, for sure. This is where like a mood board can be a great thing to go back to, right? Like, look at what are the what are some example pieces that communicate the tone that you're trying to communicate, and then starting to, even though if you're not an artist, but you want to figure out how to work through art for this, like coming up with a word cloud for like what are the words you'd associate with these pieces of art, so that you know how to ask for what you want from your art, or know how to start with creating what you want in your art for rendering that same kind of tone, for creating that same kind of mood.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope that's answered your question. Tone is all about delivery, and delivery is all about your medium. So pick your medium and then decide how you want to communicate with your audience, whoever your audience is. And that's tone, basically. Yeah. And it's important to mention that does also include character experiences, particularly where you're using third person POV. So where you're talking through your character's voice, either in the first person or the third person. If it's close to your character, then character experience is a big part of tone. And character voice is a big part of tone. And if it's your players, then they're a big part, because the way that they act necessarily determines the tone. If your players are a laugh a minute, you as a GM have to take that into consideration as part of your tone. Like, the world can be dark, but the tone of the storytelling is also defined by the players because they are helping to tell the story.
Yeah, and I think it's the constant GM struggle of like, my characters don't realize the world that they're in, and your two options there are either like use communication tools to talk to them, be like, hey, what I'm aiming for with this campaign is this. Would you be willing to get on board with it, or is that at odds with what you want to do? Or be like, hey, you know what? I would rather play with this group than be mad at them. I'm going to adjust my theme, mood, and tone to work with what they're giving me, because this is, the river of their supply of mood and tone is already flowing. You can choose to like move the mill of your story to where the river is, rather than expecting the river to come to your mill, so to speak. Yeah, and that's why like role-playing games are so much fun. It's that collaborative element that like kind of forces you out of just getting what you want as a storyteller and having to adapt and react, right? Like react to what's happening and making that work. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, at the risk of going off on a diatribe, because I think this is such an interesting point that people never talk about and really should talk about, because it's super important for understanding, storytelling and collaborative storytelling and everything else. You have to provide them those details. You can be like, oh yeah, such and such happens, and this hilarious NPC comes, and you're joking, and suddenly a dragon falls through the ceiling, or suddenly everybody just kills down all around you. And then you throw your players into that moment where they're like, oh God, what is happening? Oh God, are we in danger? And that's what you want. You want to keep changing things up. And even more when you have a live audience, right? Because there's so much you can't control with a live audience, which is your players, that you need to keep, as you were saying before, with the high and low beats. You need to have the high beats where the players are like, everything is going great. We can laugh a minute as we kill these spiders. And then suddenly the trees are forced apart and something enormous comes in and the players go, oh God, what on earth is this?
Yeah, and having those again, understanding what your signposts, especially like in your genre, what your signposts are for signaling a shift in tone. So because you can totally do like I think a great example is like the Dimension 20 actual play is like there's really funny bits, there's really tragic bits, there's like these very highs and lows. But I think one thing that the show does really well, and that Brennan Lee Mulligan is like a DM does really, really well, has really strong signposts for when there's going to be a tone shift. So suddenly he'll slow down the narration, and suddenly he'll lean into the bits of description, and you'll get that feeling of fear and anticipation that like a bad thing's happening, and that cues the players that like the rules for the kind of actions that I can get away with right now, like the jokey bits, are now going to cost me because we've had the tone shift and the mood shift. So you can do more with getting that variance again if you're really good at making the signposts very obvious. Because where you get into trouble and where the risk is if your players miss your signposts and your players are trying to be goofy in a situation where they're going to be punished for it. And what I say, like 99% of what doesn't work at the D&D table is just a failure of expectation, right? It's not having signaled what you plan to do and not having coordinated with your players to find out is what you're doing something that they want. And it's okay if it's not, but like being able to meet their expectation or communicate your expectation and making sure that everyone's on the same board is like such an important tool and like check-in thing to do. And also lets you do more with the story because now your players know what to expect and when to expect it and how to adapt and react and how to stay in the same tone and mood as the story that's going on. It's hard. It's really hard, but it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Ironically, tone as a GM is tone. It's your voice tone. It's like you're giving them that stuff. That's a really, really good point. Do you have some suggestions on how people can discover or develop themes in their world building? How do you figure out what you want for a project? And this goes hand in hand for me with another question, which is, does mood come before theme, or is it the other way around? I feel like that's a big space. Yeah.
So starting with the do they have to come before each other? I think you can totally work backwards from one to the other in either direction as long as they talk to each other, right? You can start with the theme and want to explore like the theme of corruption, and then go from there and make sure that your mood's going to follow from that, and your tone's going to follow from that. So if you want to do like a really serious like a corruption, then you have this more serious bleak tone. You suddenly have a mood that feels like deserted and abandoned. Or you could do something where like corruption could be this like really absurd force. Like it is so weird that these things that we believe in suddenly crumble, and that anything could crumble, and there's like an absurdity to that you could explore and lean into, and you could suddenly go with like a funnier tone and more comedy, and that's going to create a lighter mood. Alternatively, you can like think about like something about like, and I think often this comes when you're using comps and you think about like what you love about say like a Miyazaki universe, where like there's this lightness and this feeling of magic and this feeling of possibility and anything could happen, and work backwards from there and like what themes go really well with that universe. Themes of innocence, right? Themes of like childhood, but also like Miyazaki's a great storyteller because he can pair that with these other themes that are more heavy, like themes of like change and accepting change, or the weight of the past and the burden of the past. So you can work backwards from if I really want the mood, if the mood matters most to me, I really want the mood. How do I work backwards to theme? Or if like the theme really matters to you, and that's the thing that you have to say is the theme, then working the other direction. So I'd say like give yourself that freedom as long as they talk to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So I 1000% agree with that. There is a reason on the World Anvil meta that the first question is, why are we building this world? What's your motivation? If your motivation is, I want to create a gritty, dark horror world that's going to scare the crap out of my players, that's your motivation. You have your mood. Scary, dark horror world. Scaring crap. And then you can think about, okay, what would be an interesting theme for this? Is it a theme of mutation and nothing ever stays still? Is it a theme of corruption and darkness? Is it a theme of, you know, a candle in the darkness is a beautiful thing, but it's fragile? You know, like there's so many things so many ways you could go with, I want to scare the crap out of my players in this dark, gritty world, but it starts there. And ditto, it might be that you're like, oh, I want to create a like you were, you're like, I want to create pirate high adventure. Okay, well, what you're starting with really is your like inspiration. So you go through your inspiration to like, okay, what are some common themes here that might work well? Or what is a common mood here that is interesting that I can extrapolate from these pieces of inspiration? So always start with your motivation. What are you trying to create? And that will give you the next thing, whatever that next thing is. These are blocks that you can put down in any order because they go in a circle around the base of your world, and then you build up from there. Don't make the mistake of thinking you're building, you know, one on top of the other. This is all foundational stuff, and it's all going to seep up into your beautiful world building nexus, spectacular space, whatever it is you're creating, because because it's all going to infuse. Like we were saying, mood is theme, theme is tone, tone is mood. You know, it all connects together, or it doesn't, and that also creates really interesting spaces. Yeah. So that's what I would say. It's all about that motivation.
Yeah, love that. It's such a good question to ask people too.
Yeah. Absolutely. But like, what we do in here is always a good place to start.
Yeah.
I start every morning like that. All right, we are well out of time, but Peter, you are just too interesting. Tell us one more time who you are and where we can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me, Peter the Human, at Rock Paper Cynic is my handle on most socials. But the Story Engine deck and the Deck of Worlds, the new world building deck that just came out, you can find those at storyenginedeck.com and at storyenginedeck on socials. And yeah, like I said, you can try them out for free. And I think you mentioned a professor or teacher was using them. We also have like a free curriculum for how to integrate some like teaching about storytelling using the deck as a storytelling tool into. So we have a free curriculum you can download. And actually, if you're an educator, you just select that you're an educator when you get the demo. You actually get the entire deck for free as a PDF if you're an educator, and that's good for like if you're like a community volunteer, if you work at a library. It's a very broad term that we use for educators, so you can literally try the whole deck and lesson plans to go with it. So I think that teaching about storytelling and empathy and point of view are all really good skills for humans to have, and I like that those go out to the world.
I love that. So as you can see, I am a mega fan. I have the Story Engine deck. I have the Deck of Worlds. I was looking through the Deck of Worlds again before this, and I cannot wait to get in. I am so excited. Literally, I am going to sit down tomorrow on my very big table and start planning things out because I have a secret project I'm supposed to be working on, and I'm drawing some blanks, and I think this is going to be the secret to my success. So I'm very excited. I'm honored to have you here, Peter. As always, thank you so much. Guys, I would like to remind you, of course, that Worldbuilding Con is coming. That's the 18th and 19th of March. It is free. It is a virtual event. I know there have been some questions about this. It is a free virtual event. It is hella streams with hella specialists. We have the creator of Dragonlance, the creator of Eberron, multiple New York Times best-selling authors, Hugo and Nebula award-winning authors. It's going to be spectacular. I am so excited. And you should come and join us. It's going to be really cool. And it's all available for free live on the 18th and 19th of March. So come and join us. It's going to be epic. I'm so excited. And Peter will be there. No, he won't be there.
I'm going to be there for the award ceremony.
Yeah.
I got to judge the Myths and Legends category and got to read some really, really cool creations, and I'm really excited to get to share them.
And speaking of which, our very, very elite judges, like Peter Chiykowski, judge the top 5, but you guys are judging the top 1. So make sure you have voted. Go and vote for your favorites in the Worldbuilding Awards. That is live now. Secondhand Samurai will get you the link, I hope. And make sure that you vote. It is an inspiration to see these things. I don't know what you thought, Peter, but I was just blown away by the quality of the
really amazing
of the entries. It's like beautiful, well written, spectacular, fascinating, inspirational. I couldn't even. It was just amazing. So go and check them out. It'll be a treat for your eyes, and it's a payback to the community as well. I think that's everything. So we are going to go on a raid. Our raid shout is Light Up the Forge, so make sure you shout it out when you get there to let them know that we sent you. And in the meantime, I would like to invite you very humbly to grab your hammer and go world build. Bye, guys.